Welcome to the Human Meme Podcast. I'm David Bowles, and today we're going to have a discussion about this new novel of mine that contemplates the mind beneath the soil. The Dying Grove. There is a forest in the Pacific Northwest that has been thinking for 4,000 years. I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment. Not to dismiss it as metaphor, not to immediately qualify it with objections about anthropomorphization or the hard problem of consciousness. Just to consider, what would it mean if something could think without a brain? What would it mean if memory could persist across millennia without neurons, without synapses, without anything we recognize as architecture for thought? This is not speculation. This is what the science of mycorrhizal networks has been revealing for the past 3 decades. Underground, beneath every forest floor you have ever walked, fungal threads thinner than human hair connect trees into communication systems of staggering complexity. A single cubic inch of forest soil contains enough mycorrhizal threads to stretch for miles if laid end to end. These threads carry chemical signals, nutrients, water, and information. When one tree is attacked by insects, it sends chemical warnings through the network to other trees, which then begin producing defensive compounds before any pest has touched them. Mother trees preferentially channel resources to their offspring. Recognizing kin through molecular signatures, we are only beginning to decode. The question that haunts me, the question that drove me to write a novel called The Dying Grove, is this. At what point does distributed chemical signaling become something we might reasonably call thought? I am not asking whether forests are conscious in the way humans are conscious. That seems like the wrong question. The equivalent of asking whether dolphins swim the way humans swim. Of course they do not. But dolphins undeniably swim. The question is whether the category of swimming includes what dolphins do, or whether we have defined swimming so narrowly that only human motion in water qualifies. Consciousness researchers have spent decades wrestling with what they call the binding problem. How does the brain take disparate sensory inputs, processed in different regions at different speeds, and unify them into a single coherent experience? When you see a red ball rolling across a green lawn, the redness is processed in one part of your visual cortex, the motion in another, the roundness in yet another. By the time these signals reach conscious awareness, they have somehow been bound together into one perception. No one knows how this happens. The mechanism remains one of neuroscience's deepest mysteries. But here is what interests me. The mycorrhizal network faces no binding problem because it never separated things in the first place. There is no central processor receiving disparate inputs and struggling to unify them. There is only the network itself, a continuous chemical conversation happening simultaneously across acres, across centuries. What we experience as the forest, this collection of individual trees competing for sunlight, may be more accurately understood as a single distributed organism processing environmental information through chemistry rather than electricity. Suzanne Simard, the forest ecologist, whose research first documented these networks, calls the largest and oldest trees mother trees. These hub trees are connected to hundreds of neighboring trees through the fungal network. When a mother tree is dying, her final act is to dump her stored nutrients into the network, feeding her descendants before she falls. Simard documented this process over years of field research. The dying tree knows it is dying, or at minimum responds to dying in ways that benefit the network that will persist beyond her individual existence. When I wrote The Dying Grove, I kept returning to this image. A 4,000-year-old network, one that has survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions and logging operations, now facing conditions it never evolved to handle. Climate change is altering temperature and precipitation patterns faster than the network can adapt. Development is fragmenting forests into isolated patches where the network loses connectivity. The mycorrhizal threads, those billions of miles of fungal filament that constitute the forest's distributed nervous system, are beginning to fray. What does it mean to witness the death of something that has been thinking for 4,000 years? I do not know the answer. I am not sure anyone does. But I think the question matters because it forces us to confront the limits of our category for minds. We assume that consciousness requires a brain, requires neurons, requires the particular electrochemical architecture that evolution produced in animals. But evolution produced another architecture too, one based on chemistry rather than electricity, one that operates on timescales of centuries rather than milliseconds, one that distributes cognition across space rather than concentrating it in a skull. The forest does not experience time the way we do. A human life, from the network's perspective, is barely a breath. The 4 centuries between Shakespeare and the present moment, which we experience as vast historical distance, is a single season in the network's memory. The network was already ancient when the first Europeans arrived on this continent. It was already ancient when the Roman Empire fell. It was already ancient when the pyramids were new. I wonder sometimes what it would be like to think that slowly, to process information across decades rather than seconds, to remember not through the fragile architecture of hippocampus and cortex, but through chemical gradients stable enough to persist for millennia. Would that kind of mind experience urgency? Would it understand threat the way we understand threat as something immediate and pressing? Or would extinction itself seem like just another seasonal change, another pulse in a rhythm too slow for us to perceive? The Dying Grove is a novel, not a scientific treatise. It follows a human protagonist, a researcher named Eli Chen, who arrives at a remote station to study these networks and discovers something he was not prepared to find. But the novel grew from a genuine question, one that I could not shake once it took hold. What if we are not the only kind of mind on this planet? What if consciousness is not a special achievement exclusive to brains, but a general property of complex information processing systems? What if the forests have been thinking this whole time, and we simply lacked the conceptual vocabulary to recognize cognition when it operates through chemistry rather than electricity? This is the first book in a series I'm calling Fractional Fiction. The name comes from mathematics. Fractions are parts that combine to form unexpected wholes. Each fractional fiction novel takes classical literature, in this case James Joyce's Dubliners, and contemporary scientific research, in this case mycorrhizal ecology, and allows the collision between them to generate original narrative. The method is deliberate. I wanted to write fiction that takes science seriously, that treats research not as decoration, but as load-bearing structure, while still honoring the literary traditions that taught me what narrative could accomplish. But beyond the methodology, beyond the series architecture, The Dying Grove is an attempt to imagine what it would mean to encounter a mind utterly unlike our own. Not an alien mind from another planet, which would be exotic enough to excuse our incomprehension, but a mind that has been here all along, thinking beneath our feet, while we walked obliviously across its surface. The network in the novel is dying, human activity is fragmenting it, climate change is stressing it, and time is running out. Eli Chen must decide what he is willing to become in order to preserve any part of what this 4,000-year-old mind has learned. The choice he faces is not simple. It requires transformation, loss, the acceptance that some forms of preservation demand the sacrifice of what we were. I think we face versions of that choice more often than we recognize. Every time we encounter something that does not fit our existing categories, we must decide whether to expand the category or dismiss the anomaly. The mycorrhizal research challenges our category for minds. The dying forests challenge our category for loss. The dying grove does not resolve these challenges. It holds them open because I believe some questions matter more when they remain questions. What would it mean to think for 4,000 years? What would it mean to stop? The network does not have answers, neither do I. But perhaps asking is enough. Perhaps the willingness to sit with genuine uncertainty, to let questions remain questions, is itself a kind of thinking that the forest might recognize. I wonder if it notices us at all, down there in the dark, threading its way through soil we treat as mere substrate for our own projects. I wonder what we look like from a perspective that measures time in millennia. I wonder if the dying, when it comes, will feel like dying or like something else entirely. Some transition we lack the conceptual vocabulary to name. The Dying Grove is available now. Check out bowlesbooks.com for all the details. I hope you will read it, not for answers, but for better questions. For the Human Meme Podcast, I'm David Bowles, wishing you a new evening and a brighter tomorrow. Be a human meme.